In 1977, a volunteer named Anna Sophia climbed a butte in northwestern New Mexico to record rock art. Near noon, a week before the summer solstice, she watched a blade of sunlight pass between three leaning slabs of sandstone and cut a spiral carving exactly in half. Nobody had documented it before. That is where this list begins. That butte is in New Mexico, and it is far from the strangest thing we found there. That place makes this list. So do 11 others. A basalt boulder on a bare hillside, carved with 9 lines of what appears to be the 10 Commandments in ancient Hebrew. A single stone room perched on top of a 20-foot boulder, reached by a notched log. The occupants pulled up behind them. A road 30 feet wide, aimed within half a degree of true north, that runs 50 kilometers and then stops at the edge of a cliff. Make sure you stick with us to the end, because that story is number 1 on this list. Bare human footprints pressed into lakebed mud in southern New Mexico, a few seconds of walking, dated to roughly 23,000 years ago. This channel goes looking for the places that do not fit the story we were told, so subscribe if that is your kind of detour. Today, we are counting down 12 ancient sites in New Mexico that scientists cannot explain. 17 miles north of Tularosa, a narrow paved road turns off US 54, runs straight at the mountains for 5 miles, and ends. What is at the end of it is a low ridge of black basalt sitting in pale Chihuahuan desert scrub with the snow-streaked bulk of Sierra Blanca on the eastern horizon. On that ridge are more than 21,000 carvings. They were made mostly by the Jornada Mogollon between roughly AD 900 and 1400 by pecking through the dark patina on the rock with stone tools. 50 acres, 21,000 images. One of the densest concentrations of rock art anywhere in the Americas. Here is the part archaeologists cannot square. A village sits immediately beside the ridge, partially excavated, and the same iconography turns up on artifacts recovered from it. But that village was small. By one published assessment, its population would never have been sufficient to account for this many images. Either people traveled here to carve, or carving mattered far more than anything else they left behind suggests. Among the 21,000 is a mountain lion with the tail of a snake. You can stand close enough to touch it. No glass, no rope, no barrier, and nobody alive who can tell you its name. In 1933, a young archaeologist at the University of New Mexico named Frank Hibben reported that a guide had led him to a boulder on the flank of a hill called Hidden Mountain, about 35 miles south of Albuquerque. One face of the boulder had been flattened and cut with 9 lines of text. It reads as an abridged version of the 10 Commandments in an old Hebrew script. The guide said he had found it in the 1,880 seconds. That claim carries the entire mystery. The Phoenician script the inscription resembles was only rediscovered by scholars in the late 19th century. So a genuine 1,880 seconds carving would be very hard to explain. In 1949, Robert Pfeiffer of Harvard's Semitic Museum inspected it and called it a mixture of Moabite, Greek, and ancient Phoenician forms. It has traded on that ever since. The letter forms are a chimera. Greek letters stand in for their Hebrew counterparts. Some shapes are distinctively Samaritan. A detailed assessment published in the CTS journal concluded it was not the work of a trained ancient scribe, follows the form of no known Semitic inscription, sits in an implausible place for a monument, and was made with modern tools. Wikipedia's article opens by calling it a hoax. For years, Boy Scouts scrubbed the panel clean to keep it legible, stripping off the lichen and patina that were the only physical evidence anyone could have used to date the carving. The stone is still up there, still tilted forward, its top line vandalized in 2006, 90 years of argument, and the one clock it had was washed off by volunteers trying to help. On the north flank of the Sandia Mountains, a horizontal cavity is cut high into the limestone wall of Las Huertas Canyon. Reaching it means a half-mile trail, a traverse across ledges, and a steel staircase bolted to the rock. Around 1928, two Boy Scouts named Bernard Parker and Sidney Kirkpatrick found a ground sloth claw in there. In 1936, two graduate students, Frank Hibben and Wesley Bliss, began excavating. By the end of the first season, Hibben had asked Bliss to leave. What Hibben announced was enormous. Beneath the Folsom layer, then thought to hold the earliest Americans, he reported older artifacts and estimated them at 25,000 years. He named the culture Sandia Man and the points Sandia points. Alongside them, mammoth, mastodon, sloth, horse, and camel. Time magazine ran it on May 6, 1940. Hibben became internationally famous. That same year, Bliss published a paper arguing rodent burrowing had mixed the layers, making the stratigraphy useless for dating. The 25,000-year figure had always been a stratigraphic best guess, and radiocarbon later undermined it. Examination of the artifacts turned up signs of manipulation and deliberate contamination. Sandia Man is no longer accepted. Some researchers believe the artifacts were placed there on purpose, and many suspect Hibben. But the evidence is inconclusive, and he maintained his innocence until his death. When Douglas Preston covered the affair in The New Yorker in 1995, Hibben claimed he had sued the magazine for libel. No lawsuit was ever filed. The cave was made a National Historic Landmark on the 20th of January 1961 for a discovery that has since been taken out of the textbooks. It is open year-round, thoroughly excavated, with nothing portable left in it, and the Forest Service treats it as a place of continuing significance to several Pueblo communities. The honor outlasted the science by 60 years. The plaque never went anywhere. The Pueblo Revolt of 1680 drove Spanish colonists out of New Mexico for 12 years. When they came back in 1692, the canyon country north of Chaco began filling with small, hard, high buildings. There are more than 200 of them known in the core Dinétah region, the Largo, Gobernador, and Peluche canyons, built between roughly 1680 and 1775, sandstone slabs and mud mortar. Some are a single room, some run to over 40. Low doors, small windows, peepholes cut for watching a doorway, hooded fireplaces inside. Almost all of them sit on top of freestanding boulders and rock pinnacles. In the early 1900s, Alfred Kidder proposed they were built by Puebloan refugees fleeing Spanish reprisals because the masonry reminded him of Chaco. Later research established they are Navajo work, with only one site, Tapacito Ruin in Largo Canyon, showing that exacting Chacoan stonework. Spanish travelers in the early to mid-1700s recorded them plainly as defenses against Utes and Comanches. Timothy B. Gay of the Navajo Nation, Heritage and Historic Preservation Department, relates the explanation he was given growing up. They were built because of monsters that were killing people. What nobody can fully explain is the tempo. Archaeologist Larry Baker says there is no population estimate, and that each Pueblito shows only about a dozen years of occupation. Largo's school ruin went up in 1736 and 1737 and yielded a Spanish iron awl and an iron tack. One single-room Pueblito on top of a 20-foot boulder was among the last built in 1754. To get home, you climbed a notched log, then, hand and footholds cut into bare sandstone, then pulled the log up behind you. There was no other way in and no way to be followed. 7 are managed for public visitation now, several stabilized by the BLM. Whatever they were afraid of, it kept moving. The National Park Service does not advertise this one. 2 mountain lions, roughly life-size, carved out of volcanic tuff and lying side by side inside a low ring of unshaped stones, each about 6 feet long and 2 feet high. They sit on the Potrero de las Vacas, a long, narrow mesa in the rough southern backcountry of Bandelier National Monument, about a mile from the ruin of Yapashi Pueblo. What makes them unusual is the technique. Nearly all rock art in North America is an image packed onto a surface. These are animals carved out of the bedrock in 3 dimensions, at full size. Cochiti Pueblo, 10 miles to the south, knows the place as the sacred place of Mocotsi, the panther that is central to Cochiti hunting ritual and belief. The lions were probably carved by ancestors of the Cochiti who lived at Yapashi. Wapashi was left centuries ago. The lions were not. Cochiti hunters kept coming. Zuni families kept walking roughly 200 miles across New Mexico to reach them. In older photographs, the 2 lions lie inside a neat ring of deer and elk antlers, hundreds of them, laid down one hunt at a time, by people who kept the appointment for centuries after the village that carved them was empty. Getting there is a 13-mile round trip on foot from Frijoles Canyon down into Alamo Canyon and back out, with no water and no vehicle access. Both lions are still there, weathered, soft. The shrine is still active, and visitors are asked to leave everything exactly where it lies. It is not a ruin. It is an appointment somebody is still keeping. Every large settlement needs water. This one had none. Gran Quivira sits on a limestone rise on Chupadera Mesa, 25 miles south of Mountain Air, at about 6,500 feet. No stream, no spring. It was still the largest of the 3 Salinas Pueblos. The reason is salt. Water in the Estancia Basin pools in playas and evaporates, leaving salt behind, and salt was one of the most valuable trade goods in the pre-contact Southwest. The Tamparo-speaking people who lived here built catch basins, dug cisterns, dry-farmed, and turned the water problem into a business. From roughly AD 1000 into the 1600 seconds, this was a trade center linking the Great Plains, the Pacific Coast, and the Great Basin. Mound 7, the only fully excavated pueblo on the site, has 226 rooms. Underneath it, excavators found an older circular pueblo. Antonio de Espejo probably made contact in 1583. Juan de Oñate arrived in 1598 and called the place Las Humanas. The Church of San Isidro was finished in 1635. A larger one, San Buenaventura, was begun after 1659, built with labor from a settlement that had no margin to spare. Then the drought came. In September 1670, an Apache raid destroyed the mission and the pueblo, leaving 11 dead and 30 taken captive. By 1672, the people had moved out. By 1678, the whole Salinas Valley was empty. Work on San Buenaventura's main sanctuary stopped and was never resumed. The walls still stand at exactly the height the Masons left them. 300 years of ingenuity about water, and the thing that outlasted all of it is a church that was never finished. Around 1276, in the middle of the worst drought the Southwest had seen in centuries, a small group of Tularosa Mogollon people climbed into a set of caves above a creek and started building. About 40 rooms across 5 caves. Tree ring analysis gives an earliest cut date of 1276, with beams from the 1270 seconds and 1280 seconds. One archaeologist concluded the whole complex went up in perhaps as few as 11 years, sheltering 40 to 60 people in 8 to 10 households. They borrowed from their northern neighbors, including the distinctive T-shaped doorways that belonged to ancestral Puebloan building rather than local Mogollon work. The tree rings themselves record the drought, thin ring after thin ring, running the entire length of the occupation. They were not the first people in those caves. Soot on the ceilings represents thousands of years of earlier use. An excavation recovered a fragment of an atlatl, the spear thrower of archaic hunters who sheltered there long before. Then, after roughly 30 years, Mogollon moved on. No burning, no massacre lair, no bones. The rooms were simply left, roof beams in place. Drought is the obvious explanation, except that drought was also why they came. The caves and the creek were the refuge. What made them leave a working, defensible, water-adjacent settlement after a single generation is recorded nowhere. Every wooden beam in those ceilings is original. 750-year-old ponderosa, cut by hand, still holding up the rooms. The monument covers 533 acres and was established in 1907. Getting there is 44 miles of switchbacks north of Silver City, then a 1-mile loop and a climb into the caves. You can stand inside a room under woodcut in the 1,280 seconds, and nobody can tell you why the people who cut it only stayed once. We open this video with Anna Sophia and that blade of light on the Butte. Let us know in the comments if that one surprised you, because it is coming up at number 2. If you are enjoying the deep dive so far, drop a thumbs up. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. The river is taking it, a flood at a time. Pottery Mound sat on the bank of the Rio Puerco west of Las Lunas, an adobe pueblo occupied from roughly the mid-1300s to the late 1400s. 17 kivas, 11 of them painted. What came out of those kivas is the largest body of pre-contact mural painting ever recovered in the Southwest. No other site in the region has produced this many paintings or this many painted kivas, and the range of subject matter is rivaled at only 2 other places. People and deities in elaborate costume, some of them armed. Ceremonies, animals, stars, clouds, rainbows, maize, squash. The site also holds the greatest variety of prehistoric pottery found anywhere in central New Mexico, imported Hopi wares, white pastes from the Akomazuni country, biscuit wares from the north. The excavator was Frank Hibben, the same man from the Sandia cave affair, and the same man who put the Los Lunas boulder into the literature. He brought University of New Mexico field schools here in 1954, 1955, 1957, and 1958, ran a National Science Foundation project in 1960 and 1961, and led volunteer salvage digs as late as the 1980 seconds. He photographed each panel as it came out of the ground, decided the imagery was Mexican in origin, published 1 illustrated book in 1975 and a handful of articles, and then essentially stopped. The field records were thin. Students who had done the digging spent their careers waiting for a site report that never arrived. By the time Polly Schaafsma gathered those same former students to produce a real analysis, half a century had passed, and she disputes his Mexican reading. The murals are stacked. A single kiva wall at Pottery Mound is not one painting but dozens, replastered and repainted over and over. Every image had to be recorded and then destroyed to reach the one beneath it. The site is closed to the public and eroding. Monitoring through the Maxwell Museum documented gross loss as the Rio Puerco floodplain wandered between 1953 and 1996, and salvage excavation was still happening as recently as 2005. The best surviving record of the most painted place in the ancient Southwest is a box of photographs, and the site itself is going downstream. Draw a straight line down a map of the Southwest at roughly 108 degrees west. It passes through Chaco Canyon, 88 kilometers north. It passes through Aztec, 630 kilometers south of Chaco. Across the border in Chihuahua, it passes close to Paquimé. 3 of the largest and most important centers in the region spread across 400 years, sitting on very nearly the same line of longitude. Aztec ruins itself is not in dispute. It stands in the Animas River Valley, made a national monument in 1923 and a World Heritage Site in 1987. The name is a mistake. The Aztecs of Mexico never lived here. 19th century settlers simply assumed they had come north. The West Ruin holds roughly 400 rooms, about 20 kivas, and one great kiva 48 feet across excavated in 1921 and reconstructed by Earl Morris in the 1932. It is the only fully reconstructed Great Kiva in the southwest. The settlement flourished between about 1050 and 1150 at the northern end of one of the roads radiating out of Chaco, and its two great houses were modeled on Pueblo Bonito. There are also at least 3 tri-wall structures here: the Hubbard Tri-Wall, Mound A, and Mound F. The form is extremely uncommon, and what it was for is unknown. Here's the thing about that line. It was identified and named by James Q. Jacobs in 1990. In 1999, Stephen Lexon built a whole theory on it, a small ruling elite, moving its capital north around 1125, then far south around 1275, using architectural continuities like colonnades, T-shaped doors, and room-wide platforms as the thread. Most southwestern archaeologists disagree, arguing the material culture at the 3 sites is far too different to connect. Lexon wrote in 2009 that many of his colleagues remain unconvinced and that he still does not know what the Meridian meant. Set into the exterior west wall of the Great House and repeated in several interior rooms is a single course of striking green stone. Archaeologists have never located the quarry it came from. You can walk into the rooms, descend into the roofed Great Kiva, and stand next to that green stone. It looks like a municipal park until you notice how much of it nobody can account for. It is 30 feet wide. It runs about 50 kilometers, and it was built by people with no wheels, no draft animals, and no horses. The Great North Road leaves Chaco Canyon just east of Pueblo Alto and runs north to Cuts Canyon, 50.5 kilometers, roughly 35 miles. It was built around AD 1100, excavated down to a smooth level surface, and has been described as extensively engineered. Across one 16-kilometer stretch, it holds a bearing within a quarter to half a degree of true north. Consider what these builders had already done. Chaco's great houses consumed an estimated 240,000 trees, hauled from mountain ranges 50 miles away using head straps. Then they built this. Here's the problem. There are no villages along it, no campsites, no water, no trade debris. Anna Sophia and her colleagues described it as overbuilt and underused, a monumental piece of infrastructure carrying almost no traffic. Around 300 kilometers of Chacoan roads had been documented by aerial photography and ground survey as of that study. And the North Road is the extreme case. Past Pierre's complex, it deviates from astronomical north on purpose, still rigorously straight, striking for a large mound on the rim of Cuts Canyon. Then it stops. 500 feet of raw sandstone badlands drop away below it. In Pueblo understanding, roads can be spirit paths, the journey from a place of emergence, often described as a deep hole in the ground. Many archaeologists have converged on the idea that this was never primarily for going anywhere, a monument in the shape of a road. Stephen Lexon thinks that is too neat and argues the route's continuation down through Cuts Canyon towards Salmon Ruins is an archaeological fact. Here's the detail that stops people cold. Navajo people told the first archaeologists in the region that ancient roads ran across the San Juan Basin. The archaeologists scoffed. The roads went unstudied for decades, and in the 1,960 seconds, some were still being misread as canals, until aerial photography proved the Navajo had been right the whole time. In 2010, the Solstice Project mapped the full 50.5 kilometers, with airborne laser scanning from an aircraft. It took a laser mounted in a plane to confirm what the people living there had been saying all along. Near the summit of Fajada Butte, on a southeast-facing cliff, 3 large slabs of sandstone lean against the rock. In the shade they cast are 2 spiral petroglyphs, one large and one small. At about 11:15 on the morning of the summer solstice, a dagger of light passes between the slabs and pierces the larger spiral. At the equinoxes, a dagger bisects the smaller one. At the winter solstice, a pair of daggers frames the large spiral on both sides. Research indicates the assemblage also tracks the moon across its 18-and-a-half-year standstill cycle. Chacoan people cut those slabs from the cliff and stood them on end. Pottery from the Butte shows the structures up there were in use between the 10th and 13th centuries. They also built a ramp 230 meters long up the southwestern face, an effort out of all proportion to any practical need, so that people could get to the top. There is no water on the Butte. There was never any reason to go up there, except this. Then Chaco emptied out, and the instrument ran unattended for something like 700 years. In 1977, Anna Sophia was volunteering to record rock art, and happened to be standing in the right place near noon, a week before the solstice. She founded the Solstice Project the following year to study it properly, pulling in astronomers, archaeologists, and architects. In 1982, she made an hour-long PBS documentary narrated by Robert Redford. Carl Sagan put it in Cosmos. People came. By 1989, the slabs had shifted. The cause was erosion of the ground beneath them from foot traffic. They were stabilized in 1990 and put under observation, but the slab that moved was never returned to its original position. The dagger no longer lands in the center. Within about 12 years of being noticed by modern science, the most precise astronomical instrument in ancient North America was knocked out of true by the feet of the people who came to look at it. The Butte is now permanently closed. Climbing and visitation are banned. The Park Service monitors it for further erosion from wind, rain, and frost. What you can see is the Butte from the canyon floor and a film from 1982. It kept time for 9 centuries, with nobody watching. It lasted 12 years with an audience. Walk past the dunes, and the white gives way to something harder. Flat alkali, playa, gray-white, cracked into plates that shift under your boots. The San Andres Range holds the western horizon, and the Sacramentos hold the east, and between them there is wind and very little else. Except, sometimes, a siren, because the ground beyond here belongs to an active missile range. Then the sun drops low and rakes across the flat, and shapes appear in the sediment that were invisible an hour ago. Shallow depressions, pairs of them, toes. They are human footprints. Bare feet, adults and children. 20-odd thousand years ago, this was not desert. It was a wetland on the shore of a shallow lake, with mammoths and giant ground sloths crossing grassy plains and mud that held everything that walked on it. Park staff had known about ghost tracks in the area for years. In 2019, a team from Bournemouth University and the National Park Service excavated a set of them, and the paper landed in 2021. The tracks dated to between 23,000 and 21,000 years ago, the height of the last ice age. That put people south of the ice sheets, roughly 10,000 years before the standard model allowed. It contradicted Clovis first, which held that humans arrived around 13,000 years ago. The criticism was legitimate. The dating relied on radiocarbon from the seeds of an aquatic plant, and aquatic plants can absorb ancient carbon and return dates that are artificially old. So the researchers went back and did it again. In 2023, in Science, a team dated terrestrial pollen from the same layers. Statistically identical in every case. The same study ran optically stimulated luminescence on quartz from inside the footprint-bearing sediments, minimum age around 21,500 years. In 2025, in Science Advances, another team added 26 radiocarbon dates on mud from the old lake bed, run by 2 laboratories with no connection to the original work. 20,700 to 22,400 years, 3 materials, 3 laboratories, 55 consistent dates. Vance Holliday, who has studied the peopling of the Americas for nearly 50 years, put it plainly, it becomes very hard to explain all of that away. Not everyone is finished arguing. Lauren Davis has countered that the luminescent samples came from sediments beneath the trackway layers, which would allow the prints to be younger. But here's what the tracks themselves are. Some of these trackways took a few seconds to walk. Whoever left them dropped no tools, lit no fire, buried no one, bare feet in mud, and then nothing at all for another 10,000 years. The park is open. The footprint localities are not, and their positions are protected. Most of the tracks are reburied after they are documented, because exposure destroys them within days. Somewhere out on that flat, under a few centimeters of pale sediment, a set of bare footprints is quietly waiting out its next 20,000 years in the dark. New Mexico holds far more of these than one list can carry. Cave shrines, unexcavated, great houses, whole villages nobody has put a trowel into yet. My own favorite is the Great North Road, because the people who lived beside it told us it was there and nobody listened for half a century. Which of these surprised you most, and which site did we miss? Subscribe if you want more of them.